Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're so pleased that you chose to join us for today's professional learning opportunity. I am Valerie Truesdale, and I have the honor of serving as Assistant Executive Director for AASA, the Superintendents Association. I'm joined as a moderator today by Keith Kruger, my good colleague from COSN, the Consortium for School Networking. I've served on Keith's board and am very engaged in the EdTech community as a former superintendent. And I just wanted to say how much AASA values and just enjoys the relationship we have with COSN as we work with COSN to identify resources and materials that our members, superintendents, and their teams, their principals, and our teachers all over the country can use, because we have great resources at COSN, and AASA enjoys that relationship. With us today is a wonderful, our Director of Driving K-12 Innovation. You'll hear a little bit more about Samantha in a moment, but our title we wanted to share with you all is Breakthrough Mindset, that we are all breaking through most of our mindsets, right? Even those of us who have growth mindsets, this is a breakthrough time. So I want to salute your courageous leadership and say how much we are in this all together. I know that's become quite a buzzword, but I really believe it, that we are all doing this together. Our goal is to help all of us take a step back and realize that our resilience is what our young people, our youth, are looking to us to exhibit in this time. And so what we've done today is put together some best practices for you to consider and learn from. We want you to share ideas. We consider feedback a gift. And thanks again for joining us. Keith?
Thanks, Valerie. You know, it's such a pleasure to work with Valerie. She's a great leader. We've known her at various districts, and now so honored that she is there at AASA as in her position, and also as one of my bosses as on the board of directors. And thanks for the great partnership. I'm really excited about today's webinar, and I'm going to be really brief and turn it over to Samantha, or Sam Becker, as she's most known by. I've had the pleasure and honor of working with Sam for well over a decade. She was the head of the Horizon series of reports at New Media Consortium, and COSN was a partner on the K-12 version. After the demise of that organization, she has immediately kind of reached out to me and to COSN, and we kind of reconfigured that K-12 report, which is now called the Driving K-12 Innovation. And for the last 2 years, Sam has been our project director, but that's certainly not her only or her only full-time gig. She also is executive director, creative and communications at Arizona State University. And I love that I was looking, Sam, at your bio, and I guess last year you were Futurist in Residence at Penn State University. What a great title. I think the topic of today that Sam is going to talk about is so relevant for leaders in education, and she has just a wealth of knowledge to share on kind of best practice around doing distance learning and how to engage learners. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sam.
Hey, thank you so much for such a generous introduction, Keith, and thank you so much, Valerie. As Keith mentioned, we've been working together for a while now, and you know, in the midst of this challenge, just seeing folks like Valerie and Keith jump in full force. What can we do to support this community? What can we do to empower our leaders, our educators? Has just been a huge silver lining, and that's actually the theme of some of what we're going to be talking about today. Just to see the response from the education sector at large. It's because of great organizations like AASA and COSN that are helping schools and districts make the shift and better serve students and communities. So this is my, Wayne's World, I'm not worthy, bow down to Valerie, Keith, and these two organizations that are just making it happen. So thank you so much. And it is a huge honor to be here today with all of you. Before we begin with the meat and potatoes of today's discussion, oh, Real life is happening. Very wonderful. Good job. Okay, real life, right? Remote resilience, 2-year-old daughter busting in. So I just want to acquaint you a little bit about the Zoom room that we're in. For some of you, it may be your first time in Zoom. So right now, I'd like you in the chat, especially if you haven't used the chat before, this is a good opportunity to let me know whether this is your first time in Zoom. So you're maybe a Zoom, first timer, or whether you're a Zoom veteran. And that will kind of give me like an indication of how familiar you all are with the tool. Vet, okay, got a vet in here. A couple things just to make you all aware of. I see that everyone has found the chat, which is wonderful. Please know that that chat is yours as we go throughout the conversation, to ask questions, to make comments, to build upon what I'm saying. I encourage discussion throughout today's presentation. And in fact, I'm going to be stopping at a few key points throughout to make sure and check in with you to see how you're feeling, how you're doing, what questions that you might have. Second thing, you may notice that you've all been muted. I promise you've only been muted with love. This is to minimize background noises, phone calls, kids bursting in and Zoom bombing you. This is just to make sure that we can get through our programming as efficiently as possible. If and when you do have questions, you'll be unable to unmute yourselves. And if for some reason you're unable to find the mute button, I'm happy to unmute you. But you should be able to just click on your video. And if it's not your video, it's just a plain black background with your name on it. If you hover with your mouse over that, you'll be able to mute and unmute yourself. Also, if you hold down the space bar for a long period of time, that'll automatically unmute and mute you as well. So some fun tips and tricks for Zoom. There's also a raise your hand feature. So if you feel like you've said something in the chat and we're not getting into it fast enough and you just want to make sure that it gets interjected at a very specific point in the conversation, we want to make sure you have that opportunity. At the bottom of the screen or in the chat, there should be a raise your hand option. All right, everyone ready to go? Thumbs up, okay. So today is all about making the shift to digital and not losing your humanity in the process. I know, as you could probably tell from a minute ago, that sometimes surviving and thriving are two different things. And having to, even though you can be a very technically inclined person who's always seen the benefit of technology for teaching and learning and for doing work, that doesn't mean that this sudden switch in our daily lives makes it any easier. So this presentation is largely going to be about how to ensure that the digital experiences that you're crafting, whether it's you're collaborating with your teams, you're planning for some sort of project that now needs to happen virtually, or you're helping support educators around their own learning experiences. This is sort of just some general best practices for making that shift and feeling a little bit more comfortable about it and feeling a little bit more authentic about how you're working with all things digital. As Keith mentioned, where I'm coming from is that I'm the project director of Driving K-12 Innovation. We have a hashtag that we always use. So if you are so inclined to switch between modalities in this remote world and tweet as we're going, you can. Our hashtag is Driving K-12 Innovation. And if you also want to add hashtag remote resilience in there, that's actually quite a nice collection of remote resilience tweets already to add to, all about building conversation. And the series, as Keith alluded to, is all about helping you make sense of trends, challenges, and developments in technology in K-12 education. And it's really for anyone who might be developing a product, doing strategic planning, or just wanting to know what trends are coming, how people are grappling with current challenges, getting some real world examples and research. EDUCAUSE was wonderful enough to pick up the higher ed version of the Horizon Report and still continue it. But to our knowledge, there's no other resource like this in K-12 education. And it is really backed by a advisory board of 100 international experts in an online consensus building process. So something unique about this report and this series is that it's all done remotely. It's hundreds of people across, a dozen different countries connecting asynchronously to share their perspectives, what they're going through in their schools, taking surveys, responding to prompts, and giving us all kinds of fodder to then create this series based on the views of the advisory board as a jumping off point. Again, all of it done remotely, and you'll be able to see bits and pieces of how that's done in today's presentation. I would be remiss not to thank our sponsors who make all of this work possible and who definitely walk the walk of innovation. There's another place I'm coming from too in this land of remote resilience, and that is that how many of you just in the chat are now working from home or working remotely and have school-age kids to also attend to? It's in the chat. If you happen to be in that situation, let us know. Oh, 3 kids ages 10, 7, and 4, an 18-month-old, 4 kids in K-12? Okay, so I'm not even gonna complain because y'all are already my heroes, I have to say. I'm working from home with one very vibrant toddler, Marley. She is pictured there. This was during a Zoom call last week where she somehow got into my purse and put my lip gloss all over her face and then burst onto the call. So that was a really exciting interruption of an important meeting. So that's life these days, just giving you a glimpse of what remote resilience looks like here. And then because I love experimenting with Zoom and technology and trying to make fun out of, you know, sometimes challenging situations, I've been doing a lot of playing around with virtual backgrounds, as you can see. So this was me at my ASU Media Relations stand-up call last week. I'd made my background Cats the movie. I really felt it was my duty to remind people that 2020 has also brought us a lot of other terrible things, like Cats the movie. So that is also where I am coming from. Okay, so I gotta tell you, I really hate the term social distancing. And I've heard a lot of other education leaders and educators all over social media say the same thing, and people across all industries, because we still wanna be social and hang out and connect with each other and get our work done. It's just that we have to do so from a necessary physical distance. So how do we still impart that emotional resonance that often is reminiscent of a face-to-face experience? That's where a lot of remote resilience lies. And so we're gonna get in here, and today we're gonna get into 8 best practices for how to do just that, step by step. I'm gonna stop every now and then after a best practice and see if there's any questions. I'll be checking the chat regularly for any comments. But I shared my story with you, right, about how I keep getting interrupted by my adorable daughter. I know that there's going to be other stories that you have. So this is a time to kind of take a deep breath. Feel free to share what you're going through in the chat. It's really important that we share our stories with each other during this time. So that's maybe not step number 1, but that's step Roman numeral number 1. How about? So the first best practice is all about same paging around desired outcomes and all about stakeholder inclusion. So when you're thinking of having an online experience, say it's an online board meeting or an online project meeting, or your team is looking to make a switch for an enterprise technology, or there's something happening that requires meetings. You're looking to build an informal learning experience, whatever it is. It's all about, before you actually build the thing or plan the thing, include the stakeholders that you want to be catering to in the planning and discussions. So how do you do that? Well, it actually is not so far from where you are now. Everyone's schools and school districts have a mission statement, a vision statement, and every human being has their own mission, their own vision, and their own personal values. So it's really no different for where you start when coming up with an online experience. You first think of what the mission is. Okay, this is all about the community you serve and how you serve them. And so you must ask, what do our stakeholders actually need to get out of this? Well, you don't have to have all the answers. Just ask your stakeholders and they will tell you. Then we get to our vision. And the vision is all about the world that you're shaping. This is sort of your future statement of how your school, your district, your team, you are personally the world that you want to see. So how is this meeting, this project, whatever you're putting on, helping you actualize whatever the utopian vision is? And then finally, you want to make sure that whatever project, program, experience you're putting out there jives with what you stand for as an organization, as a human being. And a lot of that has to do with how can this feel authentic? And so we're going to get into each of these. We're going to break them down a little further. So the first was mission. What do our stakeholders need? Well, the first things first is to ask them. So how do you ask them? Well, you could host a virtual town hall with school leaders, teachers, parents, whoever your project stakeholders are. This is an active experience. You're actually asking questions and giving and having people give you feedback. So I get that it's a little meta. You're having an online event to give you feedback about your online event, but actually you learn a ton by being in those kind of practice and conversational meetings together. So I highly recommend this. You can convene small group visioning sessions. If you don't necessarily want to release this to an entire community, it's more to be for a project team or a group. Think about a visioning session, kind of like a focus group. What questions would you ask? And then finally, of course, you could always email or send out a survey, which may be a quick asynchronous way for people to get you responses, but it does happen to be more of a passive. Not bad. I just highly recommend, if you do have a passive technique, always balancing it out with something active. And the point of all of this, of course, is to get together to craft collaborative goals. And in the process, you're actually creating community digitally without necessarily even realizing it. And that's the organic magic. So how does this help actualize the utopia was the next question. So in your online experiences, whether it's a 30-minute meeting, a 90-minute workshop, whatever it is you're leading, hopefully it's going to end with some sort of call to action, because usually an experience, generally an experience like at your school or where you're having a team meeting, it's not going to be the last one. And you need people to do something between meetings or between online experiences. So think about what your singular call to action is going to be at the end, and think about how your calls to actions are going to build on each other over time. So your first call to action, you might have a collaborative document set up and you want people to be contributing feedback there, or be building on some sort of project or program charter, or be putting in, you know, if it's a board meeting, you know, putting in minutes, who knows? The next is, okay, well, how do we create this make this more conversational? If people are contributing to something, the next step is people responding to those contributions. So what calls to action are going to help actualize people working together and building on each other's ideas? Finally, when you have, when you have an array of ideas and they're being built upon, it's always a great opportunity to kind of take a step back and identify gaps and potential blind spots, and then pinpoint the ways that you'll measure your success. This not only applies to whatever you know, project you're working on, but how would you measure the success of your online meetings? Is it by how many people showed up, how many people were interacted, how many people actually followed up on your call to action? There's a number of ways, and I recommend sketching those out at the beginning or on the onset so you can track the progress. All right. So the next question was, how will this feel authentic? So really quick, just looking at these various GIFs on my screen, everyone here has an inner cool dog, Beyonce, Morticia Adams, or Bill Murray in Lost in Translation. In the chat right now, which one are you? Are you Morticia? Are you Bill? Are you Beyonce? Or are you cool dog? Let us know. The bottom line is, when you ask yourself, how will this feel authentic? It won't feel authentic unless you do you. Unless you can find some authentic way to connect it back to you, to your school, something that resonates with you personally, with the team personally. Don't be afraid to invoke a little humor. Lead a type of experience that you'd want to participate in, right? So that means, as a leader, leading with your most authentic self so that others are also inspired to bring their full selves to the experience. And of course, beyond, you know, static images, videos and GIFs are always a fun way to spice things up. I'm going to stop there because that was admittedly the biggest and most important one of the best practices and a foundational one. I've seen a lot of Bills in this audience. Okay, some Morticias, but a lot of Bills. Wow. Okay, we got some cool dogs. I feel better. Whew. No Beyoncés. I'm really surprised because I'm a Beyonce. So the cheese stands alone. Yes, awesome. We got a Beyonce. Well, I guess I should say an aspiring Beyonce. I could never be Beyonce, ever. Any questions about same paging? Okay, we can still get to them even if you have them, but then we're going to move on to selecting inclusive remote collaboration tools, which is really important to do. Here we are in Zoom, which is one such collaboration tool, but of many. So I would say there's 3, at least to keep this simple. I'm sure there's more, but just to keep it simple and manageable and practicing remote resilience, I would say there's 3 categories of collaboration tools. There's what I would deem community action tools. And these are tools for community engagement and community building, like if you have an advisory board or an expert panel or a project team that actually has to get work done. There's web conferencing, and these are tools for live convenings, like the one we're sitting in now. There's productivity collaboration tools, and these are tools for getting actually not just talking about the work, for then executing on the work together. Like, where does the work actually live? And I always say, it's not about selecting one category over the other. It's how are you using all 3 categories together? And so just to clarify, I understand that these are acceptable and often useful means, so I'm not down on them. I just don't think that they're peak collaborative. So webcasting, you know, when you stream something on YouTube, people can't necessarily ask you questions, right? It's just a lecture out. Emails and e-blasts are great for people who want to catch a newsletter and read items, but again, not peak collaborative. Flyers and print collateral, the same. And if you want to do a carrier pigeon and a message in a bottle, sure, I salute you, that's fine. So what does this actually mean in practice and in action? When we talk about these community engagement tools, we're talking about tools like Higher Logic, the platform that we've been using for COSIN's Driving K-12 Innovation Project. We have 100 advisory board members at any given time using a workspace there, essentially responding to various prompts, and every single theme, every single hurdle, every single accelerator is its own thread. And you'll see from a slide later on, there has been a lot of great conversations that have taken place on this platform. Slack is one that we use at ASU, and I know a lot of folks are adopting. You can create channels in there designated by different project, or you could have a board of directors only private channel. You could have a teachers only channel. You could have students only. You could, you know, there's so many different ways, you know, to chop it up and make it easy to sort through your various conversations by theme or by project. And of course, there's Microsoft Teams, which I know a ton of schools are using. Microsoft Teams has the same great capabilities for being able to same page and actually have these live and asynchronous conversations. I put Skype for Business kind of in the middle between community action and web conferencing because it has an ongoing, you know, chat platform as well as having an interface for web conferencing. Then you have your Zoom, your Cisco WebEx, your BlueJeans, of course. There are no shortage. There's Adobe Connect. There's no shortage of web conferencing solutions out there. And then productivity-wise, that's your Google Drives, your Dropbox, your Picto charts, basically your collaborative tools for sharing work that has been done, allowing people to comment, edit, build upon work. I think a lot of folks may already be familiar with their household names with Dropbox and Google Drive, but Picto chart is one I put in there for fun because there are so many free and free low cost or lesser named tools out there that are great for remote collaboration. Picto chart is one my team is using, for example, to collaborate on graphic design. So that's just one example. Any questions about collaborative tools? I saw some chatter about Team versus Google Suite. Is there a significant difference? So honestly, I can be really honest here and say that I've only worked for a Google Suite organization. I personally have not experienced Microsoft Teams, but if someone is so inclined to share their experience, I'm open to you unmuting yourself. Okay, looks like David actually is providing some really good information here in the chat too. And if others want to jump in and chime in on the chat on their own encounters and the only differences they see, go for it. Next best practice, making online environments and meetings as interactive as possible. And this isn't just meetings. I use the word environments intentionally because this isn't just about a Zoom call like this. This is actually about your community engagement, your back and forth with your teams. So just a little chart I made. There's the logistical side of how to actually make things, enable things technologically to make them interactive. And then there's the content considerations. And again, there's so many more considerations than this, but this is kind of a summary here. So in whatever situation you're in, always opt to enable and encourage the chat feature. I know it's a different scenario with students at play, so I'm just speaking in terms of your own work and your own work needs. Consider a back channel. So if you're doing work that you actually are trying to promote and you want it to be public, maybe you're working on a grant, who knows, your school's working on some sort of grant and you just got a word of the grant, is there some way to integrate a back channel, a hashtag to encourage people to use on Twitter or something to make the conversation public so more people see it and are able to sort of jump in? Or is it a private back channel? So we use Zoom a lot in my daily life at ASU, but while we have a lot of our Zoom conversations, we're constantly back channeling in Slack, in a Slack channel. So what ways are able to, if there's lecture-based content, that's completely fine, but what functionality is there for people to be able to chime in? So chat is important, and community tools are important. If you can enable and prepare live polling, that's always great. Zoom does. We don't have that integrated today, but Zoom does have a feature where you just log into your account and you could pre-seed it with polls that you want to get out to your community, and you can time them to go out at specific times. You can just click launch poll and it'll launch automatically. The poll can stay up for 15 seconds. It could stay up the entire time. You can share with the audience real-time results. So something fun to think about. Integrating breakout rooms. Zoom also has breakout room capabilities. So let's say I was invited on to do a part 2 of this conversation eventually. Probably what I would do is I would take these 8 best practices and I would put everyone in breakout rooms here in Zoom to discuss and make action plans around 1 or 2 of those best practices. So do think about how you could still enable small group conversations. A lot of the web conferencing tools like even Shindig too, are starting to have these types of capabilities because it's so important to be able to replicate that small group experience somehow online. And students crave it too. And Marcy had asked me a great question before this conversation began. It was, should people enable their cameras? And the answer is always yes. So if I have not said that yes, please enable your camera. The way to do that is by clicking at the top right of your own kind of nameplate, and you will be able to enable your camera. Just come on and say hi, wave. Awesome. It's great to do just so everyone kind of can see friendly faces, right? So it's not just the slides, it's not just the technology, but it's actually the people, right, that are making everything happen. So I always recommend having and encouraging your participants to have their cameras turned on, except in the occasions where it could be distracting. And you might want to tell people on the front end that if they experience any lags, to shut off their camera, because that's the number one way, one of the quickest ways to reduce bandwidth and keep your Zoom going strong.
Hey, Sam.
Sure.
I was monitoring the COSN network, which is our online community, and today there was a lot of conversation about, in fact, using a tool like this, in this instance, Zoom, but with students, and that students sometimes use like the beautiful back screen you have, but maybe have inappropriate images. So some of these things, are a little different with with kids who are always intended to push, that may not be as much of a problem maybe in college or with adults.
Yeah, no, that's actually so true. And we've, no one is immune to that. We have the same issues in higher education too, I think, just with inappropriate behavior. And so we always point people to it's the same code of conduct, as you would have in class. And we found ways actually at ASU to authenticate our Zoom domain so that outside users can never get, this is actually now an important discussion, both in behavior policy, but also cybersecurity. And so I'm really happy to see so many organizations starting to tackle and address that. Great point, Keith. All right, so it's a good segue from the technological and logistical over to content. So how, in terms of your content, can you get people participating in meetings? Well, as you're same paging with your stakeholders in your planning for whatever event that you're doing or whatever meeting or experience, think about what role that they can play. How would you invite them to present? So I'm just thinking of college orientations, for example, which would all be moving online now, which is a brand new experience, but hopefully students would still be hearing from other students in those environments. Hopefully teachers are hearing from other teachers. So what can some of the stakeholders that you're actually catering to also have to share so that also there's other kind of people filling the spaces in the room and sort of sharing the meeting experience. There's a ton of research that shows if you could get people involved in talking and presenting their own work or their own perspectives, they're automatically more inclined to continue with you and be more invested in whatever the initiative or project is. You're also going to want to build in intentional pauses for questions, not just at the end. Meetings, especially Zoom meetings upon Zoom meetings or Adobe Connect upon Adobe Connect or whatever platform is being used, it could feel really long. I've heard a lot of people talk about how they feel actually more burnt out sitting in one virtual meeting after another. So make sure that you're allowing people a chance to voice themselves and not just be, sitting back and talked at. So build in intentional pauses for questions and check in with people. Finally, consider digital graphic facilitation. I'm thinking many of you may have seen some form of graphic facilitation happen in person somewhere, whether at an event where there's an artist or a cartoonist or someone actually sketching something, or maybe you were in the courtroom and a stenographer was doing it. Who's to say? But the bottom line is reflecting the conversation back at folks in a digital manner is a really powerful thing, especially as conversations are had in real time. So I'm sharing an image here below from a graphic facilitator I've worked with for several years now named Karina Branson. She owns a company called ConverSketch. And not only has she done wonderful face-to-face graphic facilitation, but she does it online. We have meetings like this and there will be a panel speaking and she will literally draw them out and sketch them out as they're speaking. And what she creates really becomes art. It becomes a synthesis of the discussion and it becomes an artifact to be disseminated to attendees and to people who couldn't make it, and something to put up on your website or somewhere to represent, to really symbolize the outcomes of the work that you're doing. So I'm going to take a breath, follow my own advice. How are people doing? Any questions about any of the points I'm making? Anything to dig a little deeper on? I'm going to take silence to mean, and feel free to unmute yourselves too. I'll take silence. Okay, please.
This is Diana, and there's just a question. Marcia Maxwell had posted in the group chat that she has guidelines for students that include the backgrounds and appropriate spaces, and that sounds like such a fantastic idea. And just wondering who else might have that and who might be willing to share their examples.
Can I say something really quick? This is Marcia.
Please.
Yeah, I was just saying I got a couple notes in the chat about that. No, we actually, when we decided, well, didn't decide, we were kind of forced to go into virtual learning really quickly. Part of that process was to prepare parents and students on what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable in an online environment. And so we actually wrote up, and wasn't an acceptable use policy, but a kind of an online learning policy and what we expected the kids to do. And one of those things was you had to actually have your camera on, you had to be in an appropriate space, and you could not use background images. And also for teachers, one of the things that's coming up right now is whether or not it's appropriate. We also have like one-on-ones, like office hours with teachers and kids. And that's another thing that we haven't actually thought about, the appropriateness. So some people are still, filming from their bedrooms or filming from, parents have decided that's where they want their kids to be to be learning from. So many of those things are coming up, and we're kind of looking at them as they come up, but we did not include this in our accessible use policy, but we will have this included in future.
Fantastic.
Sam, this is Keith again. Sam, that issue of both the teachers, and teaching staff, as well as students, and what is the appropriate space? And since kids and teachers are now working from home, how do you, any thoughts you have about what would be good advice for school systems?
I do. So actually, I mean, very different, many more nuances when you have children and school age kids at play. So I completely respect and understand, and I'm so thankful that Marcia is going to share those resources. But at ASU, what we did, and I'm wearing my COSIN hat today, so I have a different background, is ASU created, I want to say 50 different ASU branded virtual backgrounds that make people feel like they're on different parts of our campuses. And what you could do is you could have school sanctioned photography that was of a classroom, of the school or something, put the school branding or something on it. And you could say for those that, you could, that would help teachers who, not everyone, has a ton of space where they're, they could be teaching from. I don't know if folks are on the pandemic pedagogy, 30,000 person Facebook group, but there's actually a lot of faculty and educators and teachers who are feeling very kind of uncertain what to do, and they don't have the space and they don't have the right backgrounds, and they're asking each other questions like, hey, does it look to you like I'm calling in from my bathroom? And other faculty members are responding, yes, it does. So this actually is an issue that folks are having, and it could become a marketing opportunity. How about that? It
is a great opportunity. I hadn't thought about it, but every school district should create a set of background slides that they can give to all their teaching staff. Yeah, and maybe even a student version that if the student wants to use it or something. I don't know. Great idea.
Yeah, I think one of the unintended things that might be happening socially with students is what is in their background, particularly if they're in the bedroom. And I'm thinking of students around 4th to 6th grade. Some of them have dolls in the background, and some of them have, it's what is being portrayed that they don't know is being portrayed about them out there. So I really love the idea of the schools providing the photographs. That just sounds like a great way to keep it even.
And there have been, lawsuits around the use of camera on school-owned devices when they're remotely controlled. So it's a sensitive area around privacy.
Yeah, so this is clearly a big issue, and I'm really happy that people are asking these questions. And I think, like Ann said, there's just going to need to be patience for people that are in different socioeconomic situations. And yeah, we just need to show as much empathy and patience as possible, and as quickly as we could form up those policies to, better support safe usage, the better. Are we okay to move on? Is that okay? Okay, feels like a natural moment to move on. So here's just what I wanted to share in terms of interactive, and what I mean in terms of keeping things interactive and how you would do that asynchronously. So I'm really, really proud of kind of the project we built with Driving K-12 Innovation over the past 2 years. The biggest point of pride is really the advisory board. These are just amazing individuals. We'll send them prompts, and they will build on each other's thought. They will answer the prompts, then build on each other and really have a conversation back and forth for a period of 3 months. So you could see on the screen these different faces. I think there was, in this one, into 40 something threads or 40 something responses on this blended learning thread. And it's people from all kind of different facets of K-12 and education and of the world sharing their perspectives, and also helping evolve each other's perspectives, I would say. It's experts teaching experts in a way. So this is done in Higher Logic, and it's really just a series of themed discussion boards that folks could log into at any time. But it doesn't really work unless there is a community manager constantly prompting them to think about new things to respond to each other. So you will have to think about what process is sustainable for you to be continuously engaging, the community. Next best practice, don't fear the MVP or minimally viable product. get feedback early and get it often. I think some of the biggest thing I see is people are fearful. People who have never used this kind of technology, who are used to the face-to-face interactions, this is all new to them. Look, my 66-year-old mother called me up last night. She works in mental health care for youth and adolescents. And she is self-proclaimed not good at technology, set up her remote office all by herself with some tech support over the phone, was so proud. You know, I tweeted earlier that was the definition to me of remote resilience. She was really, had a lot of anxiety about this. A week leading up to me, she'd call me every night, Sam, I think I'm gonna need your help. I think I'm gonna need your father. I think I'm gonna need Daniel, my husband. And there she did it by herself. And I think just kind of pushing past the fear and just diving in and putting something out there, even if it's your best guess or a rough draft, or you admit that it's your first go at something, is absolutely fine. In fact, I kind of want to share with you, like, regardless of what's happening in the world right now with this global pandemic, admittedly, I'm an MVP sharer all the way. I believe in the MVP. I'm constantly putting ratty drafts out there that are just not necessarily fully fleshed out and asking people for feedback and asking people to dive in. Keith mentioned my stint at Penn State as a futurist in residence, and probably one of the biggest projects I did there was it was completely remote. We had 24 institutions participating. And we built a framework for stakeholder inclusion in the technology planning process. You can view it freely online, but I kind of want to show you where we started. You know, we didn't make something pretty and then invite everyone, you know, to jam with us. It was me with a Google Doc in a dream, you know, and I invited people into it. It's not perfect. It's not a fully baked idea yet. We need your help. We need to start like leading some conversations around this. What can we do? And the whole process was completely collaborative. The draft was done fully in Google Docs and ended up getting published as sort of a kind of easy to peruse webpage like this. So do not be afraid to start with your bare bones bullet point Google Docs. You're calling into Zoom and having a chat, you know, not necessarily being acquainted with all the features. You know, when you jump into the WebEx, you know, don't forget that it's also a playground, right? And you owe yourself the same thing that students get, which is, hey, play around, get comfortable. And then a final reminder, everyone is in the same boat as you. This was something that was shared. So at ASU, to help get us through some of these challenging times, I've created a lot of new communities in Slack. One that I created is called Remote Working Live Parenting. And across the entire ASU, parents have joined it to kind of share photos and funny things that are happening to them, or even when they're feeling like they're struggling or breaking down, we share with each other. This one came from the ASU Women in Tech channel of us just saying, yeah, we're pretty much all in the same outfit right now. And it's some version of this uniform. And so I think global pandemics and challenges like this actually unite us in a lot of ways. So don't be afraid to let yourself and your personality shine, and don't be afraid to be a rough draft version of yourself. Next tip, provide your community with facilitation toolkits. So I mentioned earlier that it's good to have people kind of present along with you, invite your stakeholders in, but then it becomes kind of really cumbersome, right? To get people trained, you know, how will we same page to know what one person is presenting? How is it going to flow? How are we going to make sure if we lead breakout sessions that they're all done in the same manner, right? There's a lot that has to be done to ensure kind of a consistent experience. And also for anyone that's presenting or facilitating in your online environment or meeting to feel like they have enough kind of training. It's a really scary thing for some people to be asked to present or do something for the first time in a completely different modality than they're used to. So I find that providing them with some training and also in the form of a toolkit that they can kind of peruse and, you know, kind of pick apart and use various pieces of is helpful. So what do I mean by that? Here's one that I have permission to use from ASU that I created. We lead an unconference called the Partner to Protect Arizona Unconference. And it's cybersecurity professionals, cybersecurity enthusiasts, educators and students from across Arizona come together for a day. And in order to make the day really participatory and unconference style, we have to make sure that we have enough people kind of facilitating these sort of casual, informal working sessions, which actually requires a lot of upfront work in order to put on something that's less structured, like an unconference. So what we did was we set up 2 identical 60-minute training sessions. And there's, of course, time for Q&A. We recorded and disseminated the training sessions afterwards for people that couldn't make it. So let's say, you know, if you're really busy, I can attend session A but not B. That's fine. They're identical. That's perfect. Or we had some people who noted, I attended session A, but it was really helpful and repetition is helpful for me. So I'm also going to attend session B, which is great. In the toolkit was questions to keep it moving. So these were people hosting small group working sessions that were kind of free form. What happens if you get a really shy group? Well, we wanted to arm the facilitators with 17 questions to kind of keep the conversations flowing. Those questions were about how will we scale it? How will we make this sustainable? Relevant to whatever the discussion was. We included a special version of the agenda, a facilitator version, so they could see where they fit in with each part of the agenda. We included what I call a menu of possible actionable outputs. So that goes all the way back to my tip about call to action. So we told our facilitators, hey, make sure there's a call to action in your breakout sessions. And so we gave them a menu of what possible calls to actions could look like. We gave them a roster of who the other facilitators were. Because of facilitators, we created a channel and a community for them to help each other out and to share tips and best practices with each other. And then we kind of put this all together in a comprehensive slide deck, which is the Google slide icon that you see. That's a deck that links out to this kit and kind of explains what the purpose of a facilitator is and what the contents of the toolkit are and how to use them. Any questions before we get into, you know, we're in the final stretch here? Okay. The next tip is actually really important no matter what, what kind of meeting setting you're in, but it does bear repeating and a lot more consideration, I think, in a virtual environment where we take for granted that we can't always see each other's gestures and expressions the way that we could with body language in person. It's a lot harder, for example, for me to see that Valerie might be smiling at me right now. I don't know, you know, or you know, someone might be struggling with a concept, and I, you know, as an educator would see that and go back and maybe go over the concept again. So in an online environment, reflective listening is especially important. The Chief Culture Officer of ASU and my dear friend, Christine Whitney Sanchez, before she was at ASU, she had her own practice. And so she has given me permission to share this with you here today. These are her best practices. She recommends mirroring or paraphrasing what has been said. So saying things like, it sounds like, what I hear you're saying is, or let me see if I understand. The next part is maybe more for a retreat style meeting where you really kind of want to see how people are feeling about something. Maybe it's a team building experience. And Christine, who is actually leading like yoga, like mindful minutes and yoga experiences with us during this global pandemic, does ask people, where is that feeling in your body? Because actually, if we could place and kind of break down the anxiety we're feeling into different bits and pieces and where we're feeling it, it becomes easier to kind of move on from it. Acknowledging or highlighting that someone is valuing something, like a lot of times people are sharing something that's personal to them or they're referencing something that they work really hard on. So just saying, hey, that sounds like a risk, or you said that it's important to you, or even acknowledging that they stay true to themselves is something really nice to say. If there's a lot of people talking or things aren't clear, bringing out clarifying questions and while acknowledging that you hear them and are listening. So here's what I'm hearing you're saying. Did I get that right? May I ask you a question? Asking someone a why question sometimes feels like a challenge and kind of gets them in their head. And so the here's what I'm hearing, or may I ask you a question, is sort of can be a friendlier prompt. And then inquiring, if it's still not clear, well, is there something more that you can say? Is there another example you can give me? Or try to say it in another way. you know, I work for an IT organization within ASU, the University Technology Office. And so I'm in conversations about edge computing and blockchain all day long. And so sometimes I have to tell our, you know, senior network engineers, pretend I'm your friend from college that you've run into. I'm in a completely different industry. What are you working on? So just kind of helping people kind of see that there might be other ways to say something. Second to last bit of advice here today is to centralize all your resources. So there's likely going to be a lot of new resources generated because of these online meetings that you're facilitating and because of these projects that are happening. And there's going to be a lot more digital artifacts and resources. So where can you actually store those all in one place so that they're easy to find? Maybe it's not a web page. Maybe it's a Google Drive folder like I just shared with you of a toolkit. But a web page is a pretty great place to share information that you have so that everyone can access everything. So here's a couple examples. For the COSIN Driving K-12 Innovation Project, if you go to that link, cosin.org/K-12 Innovation, not only do we make our reports available, but there's other information and resources about the product, about the project and the products, the reports, interim results, advisory board listings, and other things. And so it's our really central place to store everything. Again, putting my ASU hat back on just for a moment, I lead a community of education changemakers there. Actually, it's a global community, so it's not just ASU. All are welcome to join, called shapingedu.asu.edu. And whenever we do projects, and we do community-based projects, so all of our resources and projects are created by our community members for our community members. And so we list those, we always have those on the project website under projects and resources.
During my meeting, I got to put all our little foodies in the plants. So whenever you get a chance to order my shoes, that'd be awesome.
And I may ask if you're not speaking to go on mute. Otherwise, I would also love a pair of shoes ordered to my house as well. Thank you. And all right, last but not least, don't stop communicating. I know there's such a thing as over communication, and we could feel really oversaturated, especially during this time when we are getting a lot of messaging and there are a lot of things happening. But community and communications are intertwined. They both have that com in there. Because if you don't have communication within a community, things can kind of perish really quickly. And so here's just some examples. So for the Driving K-12 Innovation project, I think for one of the first times I'm sharing some of the sausage making here, but we actually plan a lot of our communications, and we plan the dates of our communications so that we're really sensitive to not hitting people over the head with too many daily communications. And we want to give them time and space, but we also want to really think about what we're sharing with them and go back and edit it and make sure people have reviewed that communication before we share them out. So what you're seeing on the screen is a Google Doc example hyperlinked to all of our different kind of communications. And that's not even an eighth of the communications that have been done. And what's great is, especially for small schools and school districts, that scrappiness is important. I'm very much of a design once, deploy everywhere mindset. And so it is possible to take communications like this and retool them for other purposes and other needs. Or if you have a reoccurring project, simply repurposing some of the language and then putting in whatever is unique so you don't always have to start from scratch is a way to also be efficient in the process of making sure you're communicating. And at the bottom of my screen, this is a screenshot from my Slack. Whenever we have an event or things coming up for Shaping EDU, we don't just email it out as an e-blast. We also share in our Slack community, which has 500 members in it. Although the Shaping EDU community has around 900 plus people in it, and 500 of those people have decided to join our Slack workspace, which is great. So there's a regular community and engagement happening there. So I always post to the entire channel when there's an event going on. And that allows me to also tag specific people. So I was able to tag the people who are speaking. That sends an alert to them, and it makes it easier for them to share and for them to chime in as well. So be thinking about how you can also, in your announcements and in your kind of communities, how you can tag in other people to get more faces in there, more participation. So I want to thank you all. I just got through 8 tips. There's 5 minutes left. AASA clearly has a fantastic resource with more information on the scaling collaboration. So I'll invite Valerie to come back on and share a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Sam. We have a series of 20+ webinars that we're doing to help educators have tips from the field on what works in scaling collaborative learning. We're anticipating that a number of states, 40 states, have made decisions to cancel school for children for quite some time. And so we're anticipating things like teacher meetings. Imagine all of your 4th grade teachers needing to come together and calibrate on where we are in terms of teaching and reaching children and attending to social emotional needs. And that hopefully we're building a knowledge base pretty quickly. And a lot of folks are sharing their ideas and their tips on how they've been able to do this with different tools. And I want to give a shout out to those business partners, our ed tech partners who are providing tools for no cost to children and to teachers at this very crisis time. And also to reiterate what Sam said earlier, that access to high quality material and information is the civil rights issue of our age. It is an inequity that is going to be perpetuated unless we push to make sure that all of our children have access to the same opportunities. Anything you'd like to say, Keith? Thanks so much to Sam.
Well, you know, as I was listening to Sam, I really resonated with the example of her mother and, you know, how proud, and I had an aha moment like that yesterday. Because of Sam's leadership, I've watched her in Zoom through our Driving K-12 Innovation, break large groups into various rooms with a topic. And we were, at the COSN staff, trying to think about, you know, what data do we have and what do we need to do to help our members around the COVID crisis. And so we brought together all the staff and consultants, and then I broke them into rooms, and it actually worked. So I was very proud of it. But you know, Sam, for a last question I have for you, you know, has there ever been kind of something that you've tried that is kind of your biggest mistake? Something that you'd want people to not do? You gave a lot of tips to do.
That is a great question. I mean, I've made so many mistakes. It's hard to pick. It's hard to pick which one to feature. I think probably. Okay, so this is probably the most chronic mistake. So right now, I just want to shout out to Marcy, obviously to you, Keith and Valerie, because and also Valerie, your entire team that's been supporting this webinar as well. So there's been an entire support team that made this webinar possible. So my advice is don't necessarily try to go it all by yourself. If you're going to be the host of an event, don't also be tech support. I've definitely been in scenarios before where I've been hosting something and I've been, you know, the only person. You know, you work sometimes for some small nonprofits or other areas, and people couldn't get into the room for whatever reason, half the people. So I was in the chat trying to play tech support, trying to answer emails, and also play host, which is really just impossible. So make sure that you have a support system and really rely on those volunteers who are also really excited to up their digital game as well.
That's great. Well, I just want to thank you so much for all sharing this information. And Valerie, any closing thing you'd like to say?
Thanks everybody for all you do for our children in this country to keep us centered at this time of uncertainty. I just salute you so much as a veteran educator of over 30 years. I wish for you all the best as you practice remote resilience. It's not easy, but you all are up for the challenge. Thanks everybody.
Have a great afternoon. Bye now.
Thank you so much.